sustaining high performance is a different mindset or different paradigm to just achieving high performance. It's not just about getting good, it's about how do we stay good over time. If you just stay good, you're falling behind. So the challenge isn't knowledge. The challenge is about doing. It's about applying. Humans are creatures of comfort. The brain likes comfort. It never gets easier, you just get faster. Just because you're further down the path, it's not going to suddenly become easy, no stress, no pressure, no doubt, it could be the opposite, but you're going to get better. The way we get better at dealing with difficult situations like going for runs early morning is by doing them regularly. We get exposure to the discomfort, we get used to the discomfort, we get good at dealing with discomfort, we find ways of getting ourselves into and through the discomfort. But if we're always avoiding these discomforts, we never build the physiological exposure and we never get that psychological coping skills to get good at doing the uncomfortable.
So before we go on air, we were discussing the importance of sustainable high performance. What does that mean? And why is sustainable high performance so important?
For me, sustainable high performance is on an ongoing basis over time, being able to operate at or around your best, physically, mentally, emotionally, technically, tactically. So that's how I would describe it. And what that means is over time, physiologically, sustaining yourself, and then having the psychological toolkit to manage change, manage challenge, to adapt, evolve, deal with the ups and downs that high performance brings as well. So it's like there's a kind of a real sort of quite a broad range of tools within that. But it's important because sustaining high performance is a different mindset or different paradigm to just achieving high performance, i.e., in the short term, I've got a goal, work really hard, do as much as I can to achieve that goal in the short term, achieve, but then what happens beyond? And I think a lot of people, and maybe historically a lot of literature has been around, what it takes to achieve high performance. The modern world has lots of challenges, demands, stresses and strains for people. So for me, my goal is not just about getting good, it's about also, how do we stay good over time? And actually, the paradox is, staying is the wrong word really, because if you just stay good, you're falling behind. Because in competitive environments, everyone's striving to improve. So, you've got to continually keep working, improving, adapting, evolving. Because if you're not doing that, if you come in the same each day and everyone else is moving forward, you're actually falling behind. So it's a big theme. There's a lot wrapped in there, but for me, that's really probably the pinnacle of high performance is sustainability.
And what are the factors involved in that? In firstly, maybe breaking it down. So how do we get to the pinnacle? How does someone go from a regular performer to a high performer? And then how does someone go from a high performer to a sustainable high performer?
Good questions. Okay, so the first thing is we'll go back a step, and people who are listening to this can think about this for themselves, is all performance is contextual. So the context defines what performance is, for example. So on this podcast, you are obviously the host, and there's a context to that. So what performance is for you as a podcast host is maybe different to what it is for me in this moment as the guest. Yeah, and also the listener is a different context. So when we think about performance, the first goal is to think about what is the context the person is performing in, and therefore what does performance actually mean for that person in that context. So that's the first starting point. And interesting, actually, lots of people don't really know with clarity what performance in their context, or what a good performance is initially is in their context. The next step, as you alluded to, is then how do we define high performance? Again, what does it mean for that person or that team or that organization within their context? High performance in, say, a football team could be very different to high performance within a business team, could be very different to high performance within a surgical team. So there might be some crossovers, but there'll also be some nuances and differences. So we've got to be really clear that we define what it is. And of course, when we talk about high performance, the difficulty there sometimes is, what are we measuring? What's the benchmark where good becomes high? So, and again, that has to be defined in context. Again, maybe external benchmarks. Sports a bit easier, maybe. There are tables, there are medals and so on. In other parts of life, sometimes it can be more difficult. Sustainable high performance, of course, then is recognizing what high performance is and being able to do that in this moment or over a sequence of moments for today. But then can I come in and do the same thing the next day, 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 and ongoing? And I think there's a little bit of a mental shift that people need to make between the rules of the game for achieving high performance. It's probably simply framed: work long, work hard to get what I want, versus sustainable high performance, where we've got to be more measured, particularly maybe, for example, in terms of how we deploy our energy and how we manage ourselves and manage our energy so we can sustain it over time.
So achieving high performance is very much flash in the pan. You may have got lucky. You may have just gone all in for a period of time, but anyone could sort of do it. With sustainable, you've got to start thinking differently. Is that the case?
Thinking, yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Akash. Yeah, thinking differently. Yes, a different kind of mindset. I wouldn't say achieving high performance necessarily flash in a pan, because it might, the time frame could be a year to achieve that. For example, it could even be 2 years. But when we're talking, for me, sustainable is like over the next sequence of years. Can I stay at my best? I think a lot of literature, maybe a lot of historical kind of what we've been told and so on, has been focused on achieving high performance, set goals, work towards those goals and so on. There's good research in sport that when athletes achieve medals at Olympics, it often follows like there's a real sort of a low and a down period after that, and you've got to kind of almost like pick yourself back up and get back on the track again and set a new goal, and that can be challenging. So there's almost like that I've worked really hard towards this, and then it's almost like vroom, then I'm back down here, and it's sometimes easier and or harder to get back out of that. Whereas maybe now I think sport and business and people in life are thinking maybe a bit more about sustaining myself, not being just fit and healthy in this year, but also next year, the year beyond that, 4, 5, 10 years down the line. What are good lifestyle habits to put in place, not just for now, but that I can maybe do, for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So I think the global awareness and mindset is shifting towards more focus on sustainability. And we're seeing, we see high cases of burnout in business, high incidence of mental health challenges with athletes and elite performers and people in the entertainment industry and so on. So we're seeing, in a way, the consequence of that pressure cooker of all about achieve now, without really thinking about, but what about tomorrow, next week, next month, next quarter, next year, and so on as well.
So what are some of the ingredients that you've seen in your work to be really successful? Because you're dealing with high pressure individuals in primarily the finance industry, but you've also got experience in the sports world and in the poker world, right?
Yeah.
So you've seen all sorts of different
so
fields.
all what I would say kind of high stakes performance. That's how I would kind of broadly classify them. So started off in sport, did that for a number of years, elite athletes, teams, 33 sports all over the globe. And then 2005, 2006, kind of transitioned more into the finance space. That's my core market now. Traders, investors, asset managers, salespeople, senior leadership teams in banks and funds and so on. But all high stakes performers. And I think if we think about sustainability, what are some of the ingredients to that? That was the question, right? Great. So I think some of the ingredients, probably for me, the core of the performance, let's imagine a pyramid, is physiology. Because if, for example, let's say it's important to be able to change and adapt at the psychological and behavioural level, that's great. But if you're high in stress and high in fatigue, you won't have the mental and cognitive resources and bandwidth to be able to make those changes. Because when we're stressed and fatigued, the body is under strain, it's trying to conserve energy. And so the easiest thing to do when we're tired, if we've got to do something, is do what we already know how to do. Change is effortful. So although we know people need to change and need to adapt, we might need to overcome some challenges, deal with setbacks. We might need to kind of exercise commitment on a daily basis, do things that are difficult to do on an ongoing basis. I mean, that's a key part of sustainable high performance, is doing the difficult or the uncomfortable consistently. So it's effortful to be a high performer in any moment and over time. So my view would be the foundation is the physiology. So, and probably the bottom layer of that pyramid is sleep. So start by sleeping well, then getting the stress recovery balance right. So over the course of the day, the week, the month, the quarter, the year, make sure we're balancing the demands of how much stress we're under with sufficient rest and recovery to kind of balance those two things off. Too much stress, not enough recovery, like working out. Working too hard, don't recover the body enough, body breaks down. If we're always recovering and there's no stress, we don't get any improvement. So we're looking for that kind of balance point. So that stress recovery balance for me is almost probably the most important metric, or certainly when I work with my clients, that's one thing we really key into, is understanding stress, where it comes from, what it is, what it isn't, what recovery is, having tools to manage stress, having tools to manage recovery, be effective at both, being physically active. Obviously nutrition would be in there. Not one of my big things, nutrition, but we would touch on the basics. And then above and beyond that, then I think you've got all the psychological things around commitment, sustaining motivation over time, having the resiliency to deal with the ups and downs. If you're pursuing high performance over time, it will not be easy. It's relentless. It's restless. It is relentless. It is hard. It's very rewarding, but it's not easy. So you've got to keep yourself going, commitment over time, deal with what comes your way, highs and lows, setbacks, challenges, doubts, worries, anxieties, all these things that are going to show up, all part of the normal journey of high performance. And around that, life is happening.
Yeah.
So you've got to remember that you're not a performer in isolation. And this is key in my work. Is if I work with a trader or a fund manager, that's who I'm working with in the room at that moment, but that's not only who they are. You know, there are multiple selves. They've got other identities. There might be a father, there might be a parent, there might be obviously a son or a daughter, and so on. So we've all got these multiple roles. All have got stresses, strains, challenges that can arise, and stress is cumulative. It's all adding up into the same system. We don't take our nervous system out, put it in the locker after work, and put a new one in ready to go home. So recognizing that, I think, is really important as well.
You said you've focused a lot on stress and recovery with your clients, and you mentioned that you track quite a few metrics around there, and you do various things. What sort of things are you doing and tracking and sort of measuring?
Yeah, so with the clients, what we typically do is we have a 3-day or 3 to 5 day is typically the range assessment. We put a monitor on them, measures heart rate variability. Via a company called First Beat based in Finland. They do a lot of this sort of stuff, provide the hardware. And then from that, what the monitor collects essentially is heart rate data, translates it into heart rate variability data, and it then represents it really nicely in some charts and graphs and data graphics that basically show how much stress a person's having. So were they stressed or not, and if so, how high was the stress, the sort of the magnitude of the stress, or were they in a recovery state, and if so, kind of how much recovery was that? So visually, when the person picks up their report, they can see literally over a 24-hour period, and it's red for stress, green for recovery, blue for activity, physical movement. You can see red, blue, and green, and kind of what proportion of my day was in each. And we have to remember, actually, two things important here, which I have to stress to my clients, is stress is often seen as being a negative. When I'm talking about stress, I'm on about a physiological response in the body where the nervous system is activated. Now, if we think about anxiety, we might see that as a negative stressor. I wouldn't necessarily say that is, but some people may see that. But if we think about excitement and enthusiasm, we might also get, higher heart rate, faster breathing. The physiology is quite similar because there's an activation of the nervous system. So when we talk about stress and we look at how many red bars there are, we have to also recognize what type of stress was that, and where was it coming from? How did you react to it? And that's important. Again, the physical activity is important because a lot of my clients, hard charges, work long, work hard, and they love a hard workout. What they've got to understand is a hard workout. You know what I'm going to say? Yeah. So a hard workout, because you've seen it before, is a stress on the system. So when we think about stress versus recovery, I frame it as it's all of your red bars, all of the stress, because that's when your heart rate's elevated, body's working harder, you're burning more fuel as a result. When you're working out, you might enjoy it, but your body's working harder and you're burning more fuel. So it's kind of red plus blue, stress plus physical activity versus the green bars. When is your physiology dialing down? When are you recovering? When is heartbeat slower? When are muscles relaxing? When is the mind quietening down? And a lot of my clients haven't really understood up to that point that exercise is a stressor. It's good for us, of course. If we get it in the right dosages, in the right ways, it's very good for us. But we have to remember it is an additional source of stress to the mind, brain, body system. So it's that's often a good insight they take away.
So when you first see those reports, when people first come into your office, what's a typical color scheme that you see?
I'll tell you that the thing that most people look at straight away, which is interesting, is sleep. So people are fascinated by sleep, which interests me because it's a basic biological process. I mean, now I run workshops where we help people to sleep more effectively. But I mean, 30, 40 years ago, we weren't being taught how to sleep. It's a bit of a strange thing, phenomenon, really. But look, people are interested in sleep, so they'll often look at their sleep, and a lot of people actually think they're sleeping quite well, but when we see the sleep data, we can often see they're not sleeping as well as they think they are. They're not getting as much recovery as they think they are. So they're in bed, their eyes are closed, 6-7 hours, but the body underneath all that, we'll actually see red bars. We'll see the body still in an activated state even while they're sleeping. And that's a really good insight for people. And we see that very strongly if they've had alcohol in the evening, particularly. So we'll see a very strong correlation between alcohol in the evening and then disrupted sleep recovery during the night time, often significant even after 1 or 2 small drinks. 1 or 2 units is all it takes. And people see if they've had a night of sleep without alcohol and one with, they can see it. And that's a really good insight. Again, not to say never drink, but to recognize the impact that even small amounts of alcohol have on your sleep recovery, which is key. And that's a key metric, not just how long did I sleep, but how well did I sleep while I was asleep? How much recovery did I get? And what was the quality of that recovery like? So we kind of, that people tune into that. And there's lots of things we can look at around, how did your work stress play into your sleep quality? What are your kind of pre-bedroom habits and rituals? And obviously a common one in my world is phone at night, last thing at night, on the phone, on the tablet, checking the markets or whatever it might be, stimulating the brain at the time that we're trying to wind down. So there's a good insights from there. Then they're obviously normally drawn next to how stressful was my day. And sometimes it confirms, that they're working long and hard and the body's, working long and hard. And sometimes they get interesting insights where they thought they might have had a stressful day, but we get some green bars of recovery. And that might be because they're doing work that they actually really enjoy doing, or it's kind of like deep focused work. And although they're kind of working hard, they get into almost like a zone flow type state. And the body can kind of calm and relax. Maybe they're doing it somewhere quiet, so there's less distraction. So we sometimes get some interesting insights like that, which I think are good for people to recognize. But the end outcome for most people is, if we look at stress versus recovery as the core metric, for the majority of my clients, they are not in sustainable balance of stress versus recovery. That's common.
Yeah. And I assume a lot of your job is in rewiring the mindset around their job, their relationship with work and how they operate. So what are some of the first steps that you'd broadly take with someone who has that sort of profile?
Yeah. Well, the key thing for me is I'm not teaching anybody, you or on this podcast, or saying anything that we don't know already.
Yeah.
There's nobody listening to this who doesn't know you've got to sleep well, eat well, move regularly, get some recovery, take some break. We all know that. So the challenge isn't knowledge. The challenge is about doing, it's about applying. And that's why I think, when we get the data and you see your data in red, blue and green, and then all the metrics come below that, that prompts that kind of the visual representation, objective data is a good nudge to action. And then we can ask the questions, okay, well, here's what good sleep would look like. Here's your sleep, or here's what, a good working day would look like. Here's your working day. What are the opportunities to move towards that? And again, it'll be very different for different people, because again, everyone's context is different. What is the nature of the work? Can you take breaks or not? If so, when and how? What time do you get home in the evening? How much time is there between getting home and going to bed? And what happens? Have you got a family you've got to spend time with and or not? So it's really helping people to think about, here's my situation. Here's what my data is showing. And we're doing a snapshot of 3 to 5 days. So we have to be mindful is a snapshot. And then we're looking at, what are you doing that we think is kind of helpful and healthy, and where are there opportunities to maybe do some things differently? But the biggest step I'm trying to help them to understand is the connection between mind and body, because my performers now in sport, they were physical performers, and we're almost training the mind to improve physicality. Whereas now what I've got is almost the reverse. All my performers are like mental performers. They're cognitive athletes. And I'm trying to help them to understand the importance of the body and what the role of that plays in terms of, cognition and brain power, essentially. So, understanding your brain is embodied. here inside the body. It's being fueled by the body. If you're stressed and fatigued, it can't operate at full potential. So we have to be mindful, not in athletic terms, but we want to have a healthy, ready. I talk about readiness. Be in a state of readiness so you are able to perform at your best. Think about capability. Have I got the skills to do the job? Capacity. Have I got the energy available to maximize my capability? Most of my clients are super capable, elite level performers. And if they're not performing as well as they can, it's often not a capability issue. It's the fact that they are lower in capacity, and that's reducing their performance potential in this moment, but more importantly, over time. So I'm really trying to get them to understand that and add more value, to really value health, well-being, the physical role that is being played in your mental performance. And if I can get that shift, then that's the most important first step. Then what we do with it afterwards is very individualized, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how do you coach them into understanding it? Because I think we all know it on a surface level. We understand we should move more, we should eat better, etc. Like you mentioned. But in that moment where it's high pressure, the work doesn't stop, it's relentless, there's deadlines approaching, and you've got to rationalize going for a walk, spending time preparing food. How are you coaching these cognitive athletes to do that?
So what I do is we've got to start up with the beginning. We've got to place value on it. No one's going to do anything sustainably if it's got no value, perceived value. So the individual's got a value. I'm sure you value your health and well-being, and that's probably why you do what you do in your work and do all these habits on a consistent basis. If you value family, you'll find time for family. If you value being creative, you'll find time to be creative. If you value your health, you'll find time and ways to be healthy. We might have to be flexible with what those ways are. And that's often the challenge for my high performers is they have in their mind what kind of, health and fitness looks like. And it might be, quite high standards that they think they need to be doing, 5 times, 6, 7 times a week, 60-minute, 90-minute sessions. They might have a view in their mind of what it looks like or it should be. And it's either, well, I'm doing that or I can't do it. So what I try and help people to understand is look at your context, look at what's available, time, energy, and have 2 plans. So this is one of my core things with my clients is under normal conditions, whatever they might be, of course, have your normal plan, which might be, and don't stretch yourself. If realistically you're going to get to the gym 3 times a week, don't make it 5 and try and stick to 5. You can do a lot with 3. If three consistently is better than 4 inconsistently. So I'm a big fan of consistency, but be consistent with the behavior, but it might look differently. So for example, one of my clients at the moment, one of his consistent behaviors for health and well-being is 2 walks a day. Markets recently, as some of you may know, have been pretty crazy. So what it's meant is he's not been able to get 2 walks a day, but he has got 1 walk a day. So kind of what we're trying to build in is it's good to walk daily, and under normal conditions that might be 2 30-minute walks, but we have a reserve plan. When times get a bit crazier, the principle we're trying to do is walking on a daily basis. The practice under normal conditions could be 2 30-minute walks, but when conditions are more intense and there's less time and less energy and your focus needs to be elsewhere, let's still try to apply the principle, but it might look different in terms of dosage. It might be 1 15-minute walk if that's all he can get. And sometimes he may get nothing. And for that day, we have to accept the fact that there were other priorities and demands. And in kind of the hierarchy of importance in the short term, that was more important than the walk. So I think, and again, I learned this when I work with athletes as a sports psychology consultant, because if you're going to run a 100-meter race in a stadium, let's say it's the Olympics, keep it nice and simple, then there's a schedule whereby, you'll get picked up from the athletes' village at a certain time, probably in a bus. You'll get the bus to the stadium X amount of time before the event. You might have 2 hours to warm up and you'll go into your 2-hour warm-up routine. And when that happens, fantastic. But what happens if the bus is late? Or if the bus takes the wrong turn, or the bus gets a flat tire and now you don't get to the stadium until 1 hour before the event? So if you don't have a plan B, that's very stressful. But if you've got if I have less time, how do I reduce my warm-up so I still feel prepared? take all the important elements out, then you reduce a lot of that stress from that situation. So having that flexibility, I think, is really key. And I think high performers sometimes become quite rigid about, routine has to be this way. It's this way or it isn't. It's a yes or it's a no. And I'm like, it's not. Everything's a continuum. A workout can be 0 minutes. It can be whatever, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 9 hours, and anywhere in between. And even in small amounts of dosage time, as you know, you can get a good workout in.
When you're in those high pressure states where your heart rate is elevated and there's a lot on the line, how do you coach your athletes, and I want to say athletes as a broad term, to make really good decisions, stay sharp and be at their best despite their physiology being raised, the nervous system being amplified? And I ask because I did my first Muay Thai fight last week.
Okay.
And we were asked to come to the stadium, the arena for 3:00 for the medical, and we didn't know what time we were fighting. We just knew that it was starting at 7 p.m.
Right.
And the fight card got released at 6 p.m. My fight was at 10 p.m.
Oh.
I had a 4-hour wait, and I just noticed that my heart rate was up for the 4 hours. And as much as it's my first time, right? I was constantly trying to keep it calm.
Yeah.
And after the fight, I was absolutely exhausted. But I just realized that my heart rate was up for so long. And I can imagine this being the case. And when you're in those high pressure states, and then at 10 o'clock, I had to go in the ring with someone who wants to beat me up. And it is an interesting thing I've been thinking about a lot. How do you train that?
Yeah. The challenge as well is the uncertainty, isn't it? I mean, if you knew from the start it was 10 p.m., you can plan for it. But not knowing until it kind of happens, or until till you get that slot, is more difficult. So an uncertainty is a stressor. The way that I work with elevated heart rate is twofold, really. One is a bit counterintuitive in that I think a lot of people, when their heart rate increases pre-performance, can perceive that as being a negative. They might frame that as anxiety, pre-fight anxiety, pre-race anxiety, and so on. And there's been research around this. That's not helpful. If we perceive that physiological increase in our body as a negative, then it often has a negative impact. But what they've shown in some good studies, I think Jeremy Jameson did this originally, I think at Rochester University, but I have to double check that. But there's been a couple of studies done. But what they were looking at is if you interpret those signals as this is my body preparing itself so I can perform at my best, as like a challenge response as opposed to a negative response. The physiology is the same, but the impact kind of psychologically and performance-wise is different. So it's not so much about always maybe adjusting our physiology as adjusting the perception of what our physiology actually means can have a big impact. Because if we perceive it as a threat response, as a negative, there's a bit more of a drain to it. It's a bit more like a fight flight kind of it's like a real hypervigilant state. It's kind of draining a bit more. Whereas if we see it as a preparedness, a challenge response, it's still elevated, but it kind of processes slightly differently physiologically. So it's not quite as draining. And actually we've got studies where, and this is true about, positive stress, negative stress, where people perceive their day as being negatively stressful, it impacts their sleep more than a stressful day, lots of red bars, that was perceived as positive stress. So it wasn't the level of the physiology in the body, it was the perception of what they were doing task-wise whilst they had that physiology, which had an impact on what happened in terms of sleep and recovery. So I think the first point is thinking about, when I begin to notice those signs, how do I interpret them? Is it pre-match, pre-fight, pre-race, pre-presentation, whatever the context might be, anxiety? Or could I remind myself that this is my body preparing itself to enable me to perform well? Now, I would caveat that with, for some people, in some situations, it might be very elevated to the point where maybe actually just telling ourselves it's performance enhancing might not be useful in that moment. And then we might use some breath work, relaxation techniques, just to bring it down a little bit, still reminding ourselves that this is why have we got this. It's for physical preparation, but we might just need to dial it down, bring the temperature down ever so slightly to the level that's right. And of course, in your case with a fight, you might then have to, at another point, ramp it back up again. And that's why I think, there's a lot of good work now on breath work out there, both for down regulation, but also for up regulation. Now we might, actually activate the nervous state up and down for the context we're going to be going into. Pre-fight, very different to in-fight, or let's say pre-fight, just before the fight, and then in the fight, might be different states that your body needs to be in, and you'll need to be able to have the skills to adjust that accordingly, depending on the context. And again, different people do it in different ways. So whether it's relaxation, listening to music, of course, can be very powerful. Breath work, meditation, variety of different ways. Distraction, go for a slow, gentle walk, do some stretching, multiple ways to achieve the same outcome, depending on the person.
What do you think are some of the biggest barriers that people face with high performance, especially internal barriers?
Well, there's a lot, and I would probably call these, let's call them the dark side of high performance, for want of a better phrase. So I think pursuing high performance is massively rewarding. Anybody who's worked hard for anything and achieved it will know how satisfying and how rewarding it is. But if they've had to work long and hard for a long period of time, they probably also recognize that it wasn't easy. So I would say, there's a number. So you've got pressure and stress ongoing, probably, either from self or from others, or both. Then I would say there's things around potential burnout, just stress over time, burnout over time, kind of at the physical level, perfectionism, high expectations, being overly self-critical and being really kind of harshly self-judgmental. Are often function of some high achievers, and they will tell me in coaching that that's what's made them successful. Is being self-critical and beating themselves up and harsh. And maybe in some situations that might be useful, but I think as a sustainable, ongoing strategy for most people, then probably not. And I think they don't know another way until they are open to another way. So, and then. What else do I put on there? I think confidence and doubt, imposter syndrome, that'd be another one that they're kind of very popular at the moment. I think those three things are related. Confidence, in my perception, having worked with elite performers for 20 something years now, is fragile. I think even when we see people on a pitch or somewhere presenting or on a screen and they look very confident, they might do in that moment or for that 90 minutes or for that 60 minutes or for that 2 hours. But between matches, between performances, out of sight of the public as such or other people, there's a lot of doubts and worries and anxieties. And paradoxically, often almost a higher level you achieve, the more that stuff can start to play out. At the beginning, it feels like maybe the expectations are different, but the more you achieve and the longer you achieve for, the more this stuff might show up. And I think it's a myth that the high performers are always consistently confident in themselves. From my experience, I've worked with lots of high performers, different fields, where we've had to talk about confidence as a feeling. Feelings come and go for a variety of different reasons. And actually what really matters is not so much about confidence for me, it's more about commitment. It's, if in this moment, there's something you need to do because that's the right action for this moment, the reality is you might have to take that action with a slightly lower level of confidence than you might ideally like. But if you rely on only being able to do things when you've got the feeling, it's like, I'll go to the gym when I'm motivated. Okay, great. So now we've got to wait for this sufficient level of motivation to arise before we go to the gym, as opposed to, I'm going to commit to going to the gym tomorrow morning at whatever time and doing this workout. And irrespective of how I'm feeling, outside of the extremes where maybe, medically there's some, but in that normal range of human emotions, maybe I wake up and I'm feeling a bit tired. I'm not really fancying it and my motivation is a bit lower, but I'm committed to going to the gym. Maybe it's a value-based commitment or it's a goal-based commitment or both. And I go to the gym and I do the workout, even though my mind was telling me I didn't really fancy it. I was feeling a bit tired and maybe I could just stay in bed. And that's the high performers. They're the ones who are consistently doing those behaviors, the action, but they are still getting the doubts, the worries, the anxieties. They still feel tired. They still don't fancy it every single day because they're human, like the rest of us. Human performance is preceded by the word human. We have to remember that sometimes. And for me, this is like the X factor, is how often can I do what needs to be done, even though it may be in the presence of unwanted or difficult thoughts, emotions, sensations, impulses, urges, etc.
And when you look at those who do that versus those who don't, what have you noticed the difference in effectively the materials in that person, because it's very similar to what we do in terms of body transformation. When when everything's going well in your life, it's easy to go out for your walks, go to the gym, stick to your diet.
Yeah.
As soon as something happens and life gets in the way, diet falls out the window, training stops.
Yeah.
For some people, for others, it continues, and they continue to sort of effectively fight through.
Yeah.
But where do you see, what do you think is different there? Do you think you're born with this, or do you think this is a learned skill, or do you think this is an environmental thing?
All is my non-committal answer. Okay, so I would say, think about us, who we are now, as a result of three forces on an apex of each of the triangle points. Genetics at the top, disposition, environment, and experiences. Once we're out of the womb, we've got our kind of genetic kind of layout. Genes are activated as we go through life, but there's kind of a force that's kind of more so out of our control. But environment and experience, the learning piece, we have more controllability over. So that's what we can work with. So I think it's a combination of all three. So if you look at personality theory, for example, people who are conscientious by personality will generally get stuff done even when it's hard to do it, because they believe in, doing the work, working hard, and so on. If you're at the other end of the scale, it's going to be harder sometimes to do what you need to do because you're not quite as driven by doing the work as such. So and in my clients, there is some relationship between where they are on conscientiousness as a personality trait and how effective they are, because you have to consistently get that work done. But it is also trainable. So personality is, let's call it a bit like the anchor, but then a boat on the surface can move around a lot. So we can get some movement in the boat. We can change the behaviors, and that's where things like goals, really meaningful goals become important, or values, really valuing my health. And maybe I value my health, and maybe I want to run the London Marathon to raise some money for charity. Now I've got two forces now. So if I have to go out for a run tomorrow morning and it's wet and it's rainy, if I don't have a value or a goal, I'm faced with a behavior of go for a run today. Let's say it's 8 miles in the rain, early morning. Can I get out and do the behavior? Maybe I can. Maybe some people will find that easier than others. But if I really value being healthy, and running is a behavior for me that is the practice of the value of being healthy, and so I value running as a value-driven behavior, and maybe I'm also doing it to raise money for a charity that I really care about for an event in the future, then suddenly when I'm faced with that choice of, the easy choice now, stay in bed. That's the comfortable choice. But in the long term, if each day I stay in bed, I will probably not achieve my marathon target. The run itself will become more difficult because I haven't done the training, and I'm not acting in line with my values. And that actually, in the long term, will cause some kind of dissonance and discomfort. The alternative choice is I get out of bed, I do the training session because it's something I value as a part of my value of being healthy, and it moves me a step closer towards achieving my goal. And so now I've got these two forces. One maybe is more intrinsic, one's maybe a little bit of extrinsic in there as well, with maybe raising the money and so on. But you're doing it through your own choice. So we've got a bit of powerful leverage now in that moment to get out. And I think that's what people need to tap into: committed action, actions driven by value or a goal, and or both, because the brain-body decision is this: if this behavior is uncomfortable, how am I can I bring sufficient level of purpose and meaning to make the discomfort worthwhile? So not many people are going to weather discomfort purely for the sake of being uncomfortable, because there's no evolutionary or biological benefit to being uncomfortable for the sake of it. Humans are creatures of comfort. The brain likes comfort, safety, security. So if we're going to ask it to do things which are uncomfortable, as historically hunting might have been, it's a risk, but we need to do it for survival. So people would have done it. They've done it, for thousands, millions of years, whatever it might be. And again, in the modern world, same thing. If we're going to do some of these behaviors, recognize up front, they might be uncomfortable. Am I willing to do these behaviors knowing they're going to be uncomfortable? So we have to have a willingness. We need commitment and we need willingness. And then we need to know clearly what the behaviors are. And when it gets to the behavior, the piece here is also, we can think about, making them habitual. But my rule of behavior is the biggest predictor of whether a person has a behavior or not is how easy it is to do that behavior. For example, if I want to get myself fit and healthy and I choose, well, let's say I'm told I need to go to the gym and my nearest gym is a 60-minute drive away. So I have to drive an hour there, do my workout and drive back, versus I'm given the choice of maybe doing a workout in my garden or in the garage or going for a run where I can actually leave my house, do half an hour, be back in again. One may be preferable, but one's a lot easier. So when we think about consistency, that which is easy will probably be more consistent. And if we can kind of create not just internal environment, but if we can create an external environment around us that facilitates that, healthy food in the house versus junk food, whatever is easiest to reach for is the easiest to eat and consume. If it's easy to get your hand on a bit of cake, that's what you're going to do. If the cake, you have to walk 2 miles to the shop to go and buy it and then bring it back again, and there's an apple there to hand, it's an easier choice to eat the apple. So I think, thinking about the role of not just our inner environment, but what's around us, and trying to shape it to make it easier. So a bit of willingness, a bit of commitment, shape the environment, and then suddenly it becomes a little bit easier, but never easy. And I think that's the other myth, is people expect maybe at some point to kind of crack some kind of magical code and suddenly all this stuff is easy. And there's a great quote I always come back down to from Greg LeMond. Greg LeMond was an American cyclist, first American winner of the Tour de France. I'm going to go something like 1986, 87, that kind of era. But he has this quote about cycling where he says something like, it never gets easier, you just get faster. And that, I like that, because that's like high performance. It's not going to get easier. It's not just because you're further down the path. It's not going to suddenly become easy, no stress, no pressure, no doubt. No, it could be the opposite, but you're going to get better. You're going to get better at what you do. And actually, the way we get better at dealing with difficult situations, like going for runs early morning, is by doing them regularly. Because then we build, we get exposure to the discomfort. We get used to the discomfort. We get good at dealing with discomfort. We find ways of getting ourselves into and through the discomfort. Then it becomes reinforcing. Oh, if I wake up in the morning and I don't feel like it, that's okay, because I can still get myself out there because I've done it many times before. But if we're always avoiding these discomforts, we never build the physiological exposure, and we never get that psychological coping skills to get good at doing the uncomfortable. And I think, elite performers have learned how to get good with all the discomforts that their performance brings. Sometimes taught, sometimes self-learned through experience.
Do you think that's what keeps people going 10, 15, 20, 25 years into their career, sport, whatever their high performance context is?
I think if you keep going that long, it's quite unusual. So let's recognize that. We can all probably bring to mind examples of people that have done, 15, 20, 25 years at the top, very top. But they are quite unusual. Many people will not, even the next layer down won't be quite as extreme as that. I think you've got to really enjoy what you do. And I think it's very difficult to do something that requires a lot of time, energy and effort for a long period of time if you don't get much joy from it. I'm not saying people have never done that before. I think Chris Boardman, again, a cyclist, British cyclist, talked about how he wanted to kind of be an elite athlete performer, and it happened that cycling was what he was really good at. But I'm sure he said one time that maybe that wouldn't have been his preferred sport necessarily. If he could have chosen anything and been as good at something else, he wouldn't have chosen cycling. Cycling's painful; it's a sport of suffering. But he was good at that, so it actually worked out okay. He did exceptionally well. So I think he would have probably had to work a bit harder to do the training because it maybe wasn't his natural preference or choice. But of course, he had strengths, interests, passions around that kind of maybe balanced it, and that kind of pursuit of just being a high performer in general. Steve Kerr, who's the head coach at the Golden State Warriors in basketball team, NBA in the US, they've got 4 core values in that team, one of which is joy. Now, there's not many elite sports teams, probably even, I would like to know actually if there's any businesses out there where one of their core values is joy. Or similar. But why did people get into sport in the first place? Why did people start playing basketball? Why did, you get interested in fitness? Why do I do what I do? Why did I start doing it? Because I enjoyed it. And so it's going to be much easier to sustain it if we enjoy it, or we enjoy the experience of it, or we might enjoy the challenge of it. But I think if there's no enjoyment coming back, then I think it becomes a bit of a grind, and you can grind through. Yeah. But I think you pay a price later down the line, versus if that journey is bolstered more by a sense of joy, intrinsic motivations versus extrinsic, and so on. So
how did you stumble into high performance coaching and the various different fields that you've
I'm glad you said, how did you stumble into it? Because that's basically how my career has progressed, a series of stumbles from one into another.
Well, looking at your CV, it looks too random almost to be strategic.
It is random. And I think this is a good learning for me, and for all people. Like when we do work with clients about values, I talk about it's a direction to move in as opposed to a precise destination. So my direction of travel, what I've always enjoyed, and the first time I can recall this happening for me was when I was about 14 and I was at school, and I was quite a keen sports person, and the coach of our cricket team asked if anybody would like to help coach the I think I was 14, so probably, what is it, year 9 in modern language, year 3 in old school language for those of you in the older years, secondary. And he asked for some helpers to coach the younger kids, the year 7s as they would be now. And I volunteered, and I turned up twice a week for the whole term outside of my own practice, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I did the same the next year, I went on to do a PE and sports coaching and sports science degree. I taught PE and sport for a long time, thoroughly enjoyed that, moved into sports psychology. Now, as you know, I do a lot of work sort of in the financial sector, but my direction of travel is, let's call it, helping people to improve their performance, which started off helping young kids improve their cricket. And now I'm working with, elite level traders and fund managers. It's been poker players, it's been senior leaders, it's been salespeople, it's been athletes. So I think there's been a consistent joy for me. Nothing is more joyful than me than if I get some feedback that what I've done with a person, not done with them, when we've worked together, that work has resulted in them becoming a better person and a better performer than they were before we met. That's what it's all about for me. Now, if someone said to me, if I taught you, Steve, a few bakery skills, would you come and help out coach some of my cooking students? I'd go, great. If I can help someone be a better cooking student, I'll be happy with that, because I would find joy in the person getting better at the craft. Essentially, the craft is almost, for me, irrelevant. What I get the joy from is a process of moving people forward, the helping piece. Having said that, I do enjoy if the craft has also got high stress, high pressure, because it's a little bit more interesting and engaging. So that's an extra layer. But the core, helping people, that's what I realized about 15 years, 20 years ago. And so if I'm doing anything where I'm helping people, I'm probably getting some joy, whatever that is. So although my career has changed, as you've observed on the CV, it's been enjoyable throughout, because I'm, it's the common thread is the coaching, training, teaching, helping people. I think it's just understanding that for yourself. It's understanding, where do I find joy from? What strengths do I have? I would say probably I'm not always one to kind of blow my own trumpet as such, but I think I have realized that over the years I probably do have some maybe dispositional or learned when I was younger strengths around, coaching people, listening and so on, that I maybe do better than some other people do. So that kind of helped me a little bit as well. Maybe I did it and I enjoyed it and I was okay at it, so I did more of it, as we often are. But yeah, I think, people should be looking for this kind of stuff. I hate it when people say to me, I had this discussion with a good friend of mine who's the head of talent in a big firm, and she said to me one day, she said, Steve, what's it about when people say to you or say to me, I survived the day? She goes, what's that? Why is it good to survive the day? That shouldn't be the mentality of being in work. What's your goal this morning? Just get through the day, survive the day. Yeah. Now, of course, there's an element for all of us where there's a little bit of that, but it shouldn't all be about just surviving the day. So I think we've got to look for, where do I get joy from, even if it's parts of the day. What engages me, what interests me, how can I craft what I do so that I can do a bit more of the things that matter to me, the things I care about, the things that bring me joy, satisfaction, and so on. How do I Yeah, how do I bring my best self to my work? And that's in the benefit of the individual, the firm, the team, whoever it is.
I love it. What's your context of high performance? What does it mean to you personally?
In my role?
Yeah, it's you as a person.
For me, okay, yeah, right, gotcha. A slightly easier question. Always it's one of those things where you think, I hope nobody asks me what my definition is. High performance in my role.
We can finish with that.
Yeah. High performance for me in my role is, I would define it probably as showing up with people, because people are, crudely, they're paying for my time, expertise, whatever. So they're investing themselves and time and effort into a process. So for me, high performance is whenever I'm with a person, podcast, unpaid, of course, just to clarify that. But whether it's podcast, whether it's coaching client, training, whoever it is, for me, high performance is showing up, bringing my best self to that moment, and in some way, hopefully, making it a better, either in that moment or beyond, making it better for those people that I was with. And if I can do that on a consistent basis, that for me is my kind of like, that's sort of the core anchor point for me. And then my other measure for me of high performance is that my best and my ability to show up for you today and for other people improves over time. I.e., it's really important to me that I develop my craft, keep learning, keep going on courses myself, keep retraining, keep speaking to other people, read a lot, whatever I can do to make sure that if we had a similar conversation in maybe, let's say, 2 years' time, I was able to bring even more to that than I brought today. So I think it's the kind of, how am I in the moment, but also that path of, and making each moment better over the sequence of moments over time.
I love it. For those listening, you won't be able to see Steve's enormous bookshelf behind him. And you mentioned reading and learning. What have been some of your favorite books you've read in the last year?
This is my second worst question. I hate people asking me.
You're asking for it. You're asking for it. With
yeah, I know. I've realised that I'm going to have to change my office wall. This is one bookshelf of many, by the way. I'm in like a small garden shed, so I can't get all the. This is like the chosen.
Do you want me to ask you which one is your favourite in each shelf?
But they are categorised by different themes. This is an insight into me as a person. I'll tell you some good books based on our theme. If I dig down into that, so in fact, actually, this is based on what we were talking about earlier. This book here, Steve Magness, Do Hard Things. If anyone's not read that, that is an absolutely cracking read. Do Hard Things, Steve Magness. So all again about, doing the uncomfortable, the paradoxical side of being with it. So that's a definite one. I really enjoyed that. There's another great one, which I love, another one of my favorite authors, Stephen Kotler, The Art of Impossible.
Ooh, peak performance primer.
Yeah. So that's a great, great book. And actually, the book he wrote before that is called The Rise of the Superman, which is all about how elite athletes and the neurobiology of flow have driven high performance. And that was one of my best reads. It's one of those books I started it, I think, in the morning, and by midnight I'd finished it. I literally physically could not put it down. It's I used to work with extreme sports athletes, so that was good. It was all about flow, neurobiology. It was literally everything in a book that could engage me. Another good book that's based on something we talked about earlier, James Nestor, Breath. Yeah, cracking read. Let's try and find one more. Maybe I'll tell you actually a good book. It's a bit an off the wall one, this one, but around some of the challenges of high performance and dealing with some of the thoughts, emotions, sensations. Confidence Gap, Russ Harris. And it's not just about confidence. He uses it as a theme. There's a lot more to it than that. It's really about how we perform at our best and how we manage thoughts, emotions, sensations using what they call acceptance commitment type techniques. So, which is really about being able to work with what shows up, not having to get rid of it and so on. So, so I think again, I'm not saying they're my absolute favorites. It's like asking me who's your favorite child is. But there are many, many great books depending on the genre. But those, I think, based on what we talked about, for people who are listening, they're definitely 4 books that are a good read.
And I believe you've got a few books of your own, if you want to share for those who may be interested.
Yeah, can do. Yes. So if anybody is in the trading investing space, then there's 3 books. I'll do them in sort of oldest to newest. So first book was called High Performance Trading, 2009. Second book, Trader Mind, looking at sort of mindfulness, based strategies for traders and fund managers. That was 2014. And my last book came out, I think it was 2020, Bulletproof Trader, which is a bit of mixture of kind of how we deal with the challenging situations of trading and navigating the markets. And to be honest, that book, if you weren't a trader or investor and you took out the word trader or investor and put salesperson, senior leader, for probably 70% of the book, it would still make sense for you. So there'll be some things that you won't get because of some of the context and language, but the themes in there and some of the practices would be quite useful. So the other two are definitely much more for the trading and investing population, but Bulletproof Trader maybe has got a little bit more broader appeal.
And where can people find out more about some of your work, Steve?
Yeah, so
want to reach out.
Yeah, if anybody wants to get in touch, two main places really, Akash. One is the website, performanceedgeconsulting.co.uk. And then the other one really is just LinkedIn. That's my only social media. So if you won't find me anywhere else apart from those two places, really.
I did try and find you on Instagram earlier, but
no Instagram, no Twitter, no Facebook. I am, I guess old school in that respect. But but LinkedIn. I wouldn't say I'm like an active LinkedIn person, but I'm on there. If you want to connect, say hello, and occasionally I'll post some things which are maybe of relatively high interest.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Steve. I think it's been a lot of value here. I love chatting about high performance, and I think some of the work you're doing is incredible. So keep doing your thing.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.